I don't know. I just view Zosha's facial expression here to be kind of manipulative. Um, I think there's more here than just. All right, there is so much to talk about in this episode, episode 7, Gap of season 1 of Pluribus. I have the topics over on the left side of the screen. We're going to talk about Carol. We're going to talk about the mental toll that this isolation is taking on her, how it is, in some ways, a form of torture, analogous to what she might have gone through on a, not on a literal level, but on a, spiritual level, analogous to the torture she would have underwent during conversion therapy. We're going to talk about her self-discovery and happiness and her depression. Then we're going to move on to Manusos and everything that went down with him in this episode, his morality, the little world building nuggets that we're getting from the brief bits of dialogue that we have during the Manuso sequences. And then we're going to move on to a new section called Shipwatch. Now, I wanted to begin to take a look at Zosia and Carol's relationship through the lens of shippers. Now, in a previous episode, I talked to you guys about how shipping is often viewed as cringe and useless, but in my opinion, it's a very interesting social phenomenon. You have large amounts of women engaging in deep analysis of the character dynamics between two characters, recontextualizing them, digging deep into the glances, the looks, the cinematography, the implications, and so on and so forth. It really opens up a deeper level of analysis, and it serves as a motivator and a vehicle for all of that. So we're going to be taking a look at what is going on here with the manipulation that the Hive is doing to Carol through Zosia in our Shipwatch section. So let's get right into it. We have here the opening scene. And in my notes, I put, Carol is so alone. She's really trying to hold it together. The Hive is employing a form of psychological torture against Carol. It felt cute at first when they first left Carol alone and they said, we just need some space. It felt funny, but now we're really getting into a position where we're really seeing that it's actually torture, what they're doing to Carol. Carol is a human being. She is a social creature. She requires that interaction with other human beings, even if she is an introvert, even if she is a bit abrasive, as we've talked about in the previous episode, even if she's not a socialite like her personality opposite, Kumba Diabate, she still does need that social interaction, and it still does affect her. We saw that in episode HDP, how the exclusion of the other survivors made her feel. Now, when this scene first came up, I didn't know what she was planning on doing with the fireworks. I thought she was going to make her own little mini atom bomb and just blow something up. We'll talk more about Carol's state of mind when we see what actually transpired with that lone firework that aimed directly at her. But let's move on to beyond the opening scene, where we continue with Carol 3 days since Manusos has begun traveling toward her back to the modern timeline. So we're with Carol. It's now nighttime, and she is in her little cul-de-sac where she hears the howling of those wolves or coyotes. I can't remember which one they were, but she hears the howling of those animals that came to devour Helen's corpse in a previous episode. I found this scene interesting because, well, on a literal level, it's just funny. Carol, our girl, is going crazy at this point. She needs some stimulation. She is clearly defying what the Hive is doing to her here. That's what this howl symbolizes to me personally. She hears the howling of these predators in the distance, and she howls back and is the last one to howl, signifying that she has asserted dominance over these wolves, these coyotes. On a metaphorical level, she is trying, at the very least, to assert dominance over the Hive. In other words, Carol is an alpha female. She gets it done, and she is trying to be like Menusos and hold out for as long as she can. Further along, we see Carol continuing to try to entertain herself, where she heads to a golf course. She's probably taking part in things she's never got a chance to do before the world was taken over by this alien hive mind. But while she's there, she sees a bison just chilling out, grazing and eating. And this is another callback to the fact that the Pluribus does not believe in what they consider to be harm. So they do not believe in killing animals or killing plants or even plucking plants from trees or keeping animals caged, leashed, or domesticated. To me, this bison on the track is kind of like an elephant in the room. It's another version of that. We know that something is deeply wrong. This world is just not right. But there's nothing we can do about it at the moment. And we, like Carol, are just trying to live our life and go on about things the way that we feel is best. Now, throughout this sequence, she is singing various songs. And in this golf track, she's singing something with the lyrics of "I'm all right." Of course, that is complete and total cope on Carol's end. She is not all right by any standard of the metric. She is becoming desperate. Just like we saw in the grenade episode, the manipulation that the Pluribus is employing on Carol is passive. In the grenade episode, Zosia didn't have to try and convince Carol of being curious and intrigued and even allured by what being a member of the Pluribus could offer her. Zosia allowed Carol to stand up and give her little speech and go down her own mental pathways until she wound up on a memory between her and Helen in that Nordic icy retreat, under which Zosia accidentally screwed it up by mentioning Helen herself. But that's besides the point. The Pluribus knows at this point that it does not have to employ deep and sophisticated manipulation on Carol. It just has to let her stew in her own mind, and Carol herself will become intrigued. She will become desperate. She will become interested. On a level, that is the difference between Carol and Menusos here. Up until this point, Carol has kind of been the individual with the strongest iron will, but in the previous episode, as well as this one, HDP and Gap, we see that Menusos has a will that is even stronger than Carol's. He is willing to completely ignore the Hive, the Pluribus. He is willing to completely resist them. He is willing to go without food or water just to keep the Pluribus away from him. He does not want to take anything from the Pluribus, but we'll talk more about Menusos when we get to his section. And we'll also talk more about this just married car when we get to the Shipwatch section concerning Zosia and the Pluribus's manipulation on Carol and the imagery, the marriage imagery involved in what is going on in this episode. But for now, Carol gets a new car. And I will say, I don't know why I don't know what's going on in her head, but I don't know why she specifically chose the just married card. Was it because of her missing Helen? Is there a deeper psychological meaning here? I didn't know what to make of it. I only watched the episode about 30 minutes ago, so I haven't had a lot of time to read online theories or to ponder upon what the various themes in this episode could mean. But if you have any thoughts as to what this just married choosing of the car that Carol does, let me know. So remember, it's only been around 12 or 13 days. The world was taken over. Carol's wife died. She accidentally killed 11 million plus people. She accidentally killed, or almost killed, Zosia twice, the one individual who was sent to uniquely become friendly with Carol and potentially a companion for Carol. Then the entire 7 billion plus people on the world abandon you. And then the 11 other survivors that you have known of have also abandoned you. You are alone completely. And then Carol goes and gets this card that says, just married. To me, this means that Carol is looking for a new start, a new companion, a new beginning. Carol then takes a trip to the hot springs where she floats in the water. In a previous episode, I think it was the grenade episode, Zosia said that Carol was drowning. She just didn't know it yet. When I saw this scene, I was reminded of what Zosia said. Although Carol is putting on a face here that everything is all right, that she's doing okay, she is drowning. And the Pluribus Hive know that she is. So in this next scene, we see Carol going to the Georgia O'Keeffe Museum. Now, if you don't know who Georgia O'Keeffe is, she was a painter from the early 1900s, and she is known as the mother of the modernist style of art that we're all familiar with today. She was a trailblazer in her own industry concerning women in art, how women's art is perceived, and the barriers that women faced back then trying to just make a living, pursuing one of their hobbies, which in this case was painting. On her Wikipedia, it states that O'Keeffe was a legend beginning in the 1920s, known as much for her independent spirit and female role model as for her dramatic and innovative works of art. Now, if we take a look at some of her early work, we see paintings here from 1917, 1918, 1921. They don't look like what you would see or what you would expect to see in paintings of that era. They're very, very modern. So this is why O'Keeffe is loved so much within the art community and within the history community, because she did have this, trailblazing spirit about how she pursued artwork. She did things that were different than other people at the time, while also being a woman in the early 1900s, before women's rights were fully solidified. Around the 1930s, again on her Wikipedia, it states O'Keeffe continued to visit New Mexico without her husband and created a new body of work based upon the desert. O'Keeffe broke free of strict gender roles and adopted gender-neutral clothing, as did other professional women in Santa Fe and Taos who experienced psychological space and sexual freedom there. And then, of course, a museum was named after her, which we see Carol visiting in this episode. So what does all of this have to do with Pluribus and Carol as a character? Carol is a character that is suffering from repression. We know from the first episode that although Carol is most likely a lesbian, she remains closeted to the majority of the outside world, whether that be a strict closetedness or a more soft closetedness, I don't know. But she appears to remain closeted in regards to her relationship with Helen in that first episode, We see little bits and pieces. She refuses to tell her book readers that Raban was originally meant to be a woman. She refuses to write Blood Song of Waikaro or the Waikaro books with a lesbian lead character, and so on and so forth. I've also heard, I can't pinpoint exactly where I heard it, but I think I've heard Vince Gilligan or someone involved in Pluribus stating that this story is about Carol discovering herself. So we see her going into this Georgia O'Keeffe Museum, and we see a genuine smile. I do view it to be a genuine smile. We haven't really seen Carol smile like that in many episodes. And so this Georgia O'Keeffe painting sequence, bringing the paintings into her house, I view it as an acceptance or a beginning of Carol beginning to accept who she is, be less repressed, discover who she really is, and come into her natural personality. Now, while that might sound all fine and dandy, we know that the Pluribus is doing this. It's causing Carol to become more comfortable, to let her guard down so that she will be less of an obstacle for them in the future. So it's a bit bittersweet that although Carol seems to, on some level, I know that her mental state is deteriorating from her severe loneliness and isolation here, but on some level, she seems to be opening up a bit in this episode. However, we know that the Hive will use that to their advantage. Always remember that. So then we move on to this little sequence here where Carol reserves for herself a dinner at this venue, and we will talk more about the marriage motif going on here when we get to the Shipwatch section, but it kind of feels like Carol is undergoing a almost wedding reception here, or maybe an engagement dinner, something like that. Later on, when we get to the Shipwatch, we'll see that just married car in the background as Carol does her little walk down the aisle, the walk down the driveway to Zosia here. But in this scene, it seems, and to go along with Carol just remembering Helen in this diner scene, there's a lot of marriage and relationship imagery here. She is alone. There's no chair on the other side of this table. A lot of loneliness, a lot of isolation, but also leading into this marriage motif. This is why I'm so worried about Carol at the end of this episode, as I feel that the Hive, the Pluribus, has really sunk its claws into her psychology. So in short, before we look at it a bit deeper, it does feel like Carol is doing a bit of a send-off here for her previous state of being, her previous way of interacting with the Pluribus, her previous relationship with Helen, and doing one big last send-off, which can also be interpreted as a little reception or party here that she's having as we move on to the next part. But before that, we will go back to Carol's cul-de-sac and see her with the fireworks. And can we take a look at this chain that she has on her neck? My God, Manusos. This has very quickly become my second favorite character of the entire show. Last episode, HDP, I told you guys how I found the sequence of Manusos listening to Carol's little VHS, that tape that she recorded, so powerful. And I found it to be one of the best scenes of the entire season so far. You really get this swelling sense that Carol is a hero. We saw Carol through Carol's eyes from episodes 1 through 6, through her very self-deprecating eyes, through eyes that view everything she does as cringy and kind of hopeless and helpless and impotent. But through the eyes of Manusos, we see that Carol is actually a very powerful individual. She's a powerful speaker. She's capable of inciting revolution. In the last episode, I talked about how there are many ways you can view Pluribus and its themes through. Some people, it's AI. For me, I view it as a story on authoritarianism. There's not one specific interpretation. It is a story with some very common themes that can apply to many different topics, and that is often a hallmark of a great story. But I choose to view Pluribus as a story about authoritarianism, alongside the themes of grief and all of that with the individual characters, authoritarianism, with the Pluribus virus representing an authoritarian ideology which seeks absolute conformity, which promises that things will be better once you are just like everyone else, that you will be happier. It promises to be able to bring happiness to you and peace on earth once everybody believes the same things and acts the same ways. I view the 13 survivors as individuals who have resisted, for whatever reason, maybe their mental faculties, their psychology, their upbringing, whatever, doesn't allow them to fully be absorbed by the ideology. However, there are 11 out of the 13 known survivors who decide to toe the line. They go along with the Pluribus because it offers them something they love, whether it be the safety and the closeness of family members, as in the case with Lakshmi, or whether it is hedonistic pleasures, in the case with Kumbha. But then there are two, Carol and Manousos, who both resist the Pluribus and seek to defy it. So I view this story as a story about authoritarianism, in the same way, maybe Animal Farm or something else would be an analogy for that as well. Let me know what you guys think about that theory and how you guys choose to view Pluribus and which lens you choose to view it through. So we pick up with Manousos. In the previous episode, he defied his hive-minded mother and drove a car on his way to find Carol Sturka in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Now, from Paraguay to New Mexico is quite a journey. So Manousos has to periodically leave his car to obtain gas, to siphon it from other vehicles, to make his way through treacherous paths by which there is no road suitable for a car, and so on and so forth. At the beginning of this sequence, we have Manousos visited by a member of the Hive driving down the road in a car, and we get the kind of standard spiel that we have seen with Carol many times. They just want to make him happy. They can help him. They can give him anything he wants. However, we see that Manousos seems to have an even stronger will than Carol herself. He refuses oftentimes to even look at the members of the Hive, let alone respond to what they're saying. And when he does respond, he is unwaveringly defiant of whatever they're offering him. In the case of his mother, he told that individual that she is straight up not his mother. His mother was very different than how she behaves with the Hive. With this individual in the truck next to him on the road as he walks down, looking very annoyed, he ignores him completely. However, this member of the Pluribus says something very scary, which is, he says, "If you need anything, just wave to the sky," and then he leaves. Another bit of show and not tell world building here. The Pluribus seems to be watching Manousos wherever he is. He doesn't see them, but they see him. That is very terrifying. It also evokes that big brother, authoritarian, big brother is always watching kind of vibe that I was talking about with the themes of authoritarianism. As Manusos is making his way to New Mexico, he must go through a forest, a jungle filled with all types of natural hazards. And out of nowhere, these individuals just sort of walk up out of the forest. Again, going along with that, this hive is everywhere. They may not make themselves known to you, but they're everywhere. And Manusos, in his ever defiant iron will that I find very attractive, says, "You can give me nothing because everything you have is stolen." He says that to the Pluribus Hive, which is true. The Pluribus have been, since the beginning, portraying themselves as a higher and better state of humanity. But Manusos, through his individuality, through his resourcefulness, through his skillfulness, going through the wilderness, going through the jungle, doing everything he can, and going through the lengths that he can to reach Carol, I think he really represents the brilliance and the glory of humanity and doing things by hand, doing them in an individual way. We see that he has an internal moral standard. When he is siphoning gasoline from the cars left on the road, he leaves money on the windshield of every car that he siphons. This is an indicator that he has that, like I said, that stable internal moral code. Another show, Yellow Jackets, which takes place in the wilderness. It's a sort of Lord of the Flies type of show. We see that there are certain characters, specifically one character, Natalie, who seems to have an internal, stable morality that isn't shaken beyond what it has to be in the wilderness experience. That is the same kind of mindset here that Manusos carries with him. He repeats multiple times through his on-foot trek through the wilderness, "My name is Manusos Oviero," and he wants to save the world. That is what he tells himself over and over. We see him clearing paths with his machete. In terms of the narrative, I view Manusos as being a path clearer, someone who will resist the Pluribus even stronger than Carol herself, someone who is willing to become injured and to do things that are extremely uncomfortable. Carol is willing to do things that are uncomfortable, but I don't view her as someone who is willing to do what Manusos is doing in this episode. Potentially, there might be some conflict between the two of them once Manusos does reach Carol and finds that Carol has begun to form a companionship with Zosia. But for now, his name is Manusos Oviero. He is not one of them. And he knows that nothing on this planet is the Pluribus. It is not theirs. And yeah, he just makes me proud to be a human, basically. Now, some people were on social media laughing at how Manusos found himself impaled on these spikes in the wilderness, but I would like you to remember that this is a guy who isn't eating very well. He doesn't have much water. The episode went out of its way to show us that he is running on like 2% battery here. Before he even started his journey, he was eating dog food in his little shop, his compound, his company that he owns. When he started traveling, he only stayed in a house long enough to pick up some basic supplies, some basic food from the refrigerator. He got the car and he started his journey. Immediately, he's drinking rainwater that he carries as it rains across his journey. So this is a guy who is not at 100% here. Okay, he's He's kind of cooked. He's a little bit boiled. He's very tired. So the fact that he slips on this rock, the fact that he even stepped on such an unstable rock in the first place is not surprising. What I am curious about, though, is why hasn't he made it to Carol yet? Is he still being, it's been like 30 days, right? Is he still being treated? Or did he restart his journey on his own again after the Pluribus healed him? That's what I want to know. We are back with Carol. It's been like, 36 days? I think we were on day 12. Then we went to day 48. So I think that's 36 days between the two of them. Listen, I didn't do the math before I wrote my notes, so I have to do it in my head right now. If it's wrong, no, it's not. So we're 48 days into the Pluribus joining. At day 12, Carol was isolated completely. She has tried to hold out for as long as she can, but it's getting to a point where she's done. She's at the end of her rope. She's probably damn near going insane at this point. All of that self-discovery we talked about earlier, the repression and all of that, it's spent. She's done all of that already. It's been over a month without any human contact. That is severe psychological torture. That is severe psychological torture. Like I said, it was kind of cute and funny that the Hive was like, hey, Carol, we just need some space when it first happened. But as it continues to go on longer and longer, and as we know that the Pluribus is always watching, as we saw with Menusos, they're always nearby. And as we see with Zosia, being able to get to Carol's house so quickly, they're always nearby. So they are intentionally avoiding Carol at all costs to make her as isolated as possible in the situation, which is a form of severe torture. So let's not forget, although the show can be very funny at times, and although we spend a lot of time with Carol and Menusos, we must not forget that the Pluribus is an invading force. They don't appear to be hostile, but just because they aren't intending to be hostile does not mean that the effect of their behavior is not hostile in nature. So we see, let's just talk about how some people have been saying Pluribus is very slow before we get into the Shipwatch, before we talk about the ending of this episode and Carol and Zosia and what is going on between them and the manipulation of the Pluribus Hive. This show is not slow at all. And I don't know how to explain that to people other than saying if you think it's slow, your attention span might be deep fried and cooked beyond redemption. There might be something wrong with you. I'm just going to say it. How is the show slow? Every episode is packed full with world building. You think it's slow because there's not, action scenes every 2 seconds? There's not a bunch of music blasting off telling you how to feel every 2 seconds? That is not what determines if a show is slow or not. Now, I will say that the pacing is on a slower pace than your average show, but it is only slower on a very surface level. For example, let's take HDP, the previous episode. It was in that episode that we learned what exactly is in the milk that the Pluribus Hive is drinking, why they drink it, the mechanics of it all, how they feel about it, how they think. We learned that the other survivors knew about this beforehand. We learned that Kumba Diabate is much more savvy and intelligent than Carol assumed him to be. We got a lot of world building in that episode. Now, you might be saying, well, Meteor, that's not a lot of stuff for an hour-long episode. Listen, another TV show would have most certainly taken the entire episode to get through what we got in that little infomercial presentation that the John Cena hive mind gave to us. Another show would have made Pluribus about discovering, all the little intricacies about the Pluribus hive, but the way that they've chosen to make this show is more about the dynamics, about the psychology of the characters, about the individual character's journey, specifically Carol Stursia. The meat of this show, ironically enough, is not the Pluribus. It's just not. While the Pluribus is a vehicle to bring about all of that conflict, to bring about the various plot points going on here, to serve as motivation for the various things that Carol Stursia does in the show, the meat of the show is in the character exploration. So if you look at Pluribus to be a show about the Pluribus, you may think that it's very slow because we learn information about them. The information we learn about them is few and far between. And when we do learn it, it comes out in one big burst. But if you look at Pluribus as a show about Carol Stursia, about the human condition, about her psychology, you'll know that this is a very quite rich and packed full show that is not slow at all. That is why I chose to add the Shipwatch section to my videos on the Pluribus episodes, because it is the character dynamics, the analysis of those character dynamics, the relationships between the characters that is the heart and the nutrients. The HDP of this show is the characters. So without further ado, let's just talk about this scene here with the fireworks. We saw Carol get these fireworks earlier in the episode. I wrote in my notes, what is she doing with those fireworks? And then we found out at the end, she wants to have some fun. She needs some entertainment. She's probably watched every episode of Golden Girls that there is to watch, and there's nothing left for her to do. She is at the end of her rope. Her mind has been expended. Its resistance to the Pluribus has been expended. Its deprivation of social interaction has been expended. Also, in the previous episode, I talked about how when Carol found out that the other members, the other immune individuals, were excluding her from their twice weekly meetings and hangouts, she wept. And I felt really bad for her. I even pondered on, is she going to become suicidal? I said that if I were Carol, I would be very suicidal at that point. Again, the entire apocalypse just happened. Your wife immediately died at the start of it. You killed 11 million plus people by accident. You almost killed Zosia, the only member of the entire planet right now that you have even some semblance of a connection with. Then the Pluribus, which is 7 billion plus people on the planet, literally everyone avoids you. They don't want anything to do with you. They don't want to be around you. They don't even want you to see them. Then you find out that the other 11 survivors, they don't want to be around you. They don't want to talk to you. And they don't even want to see you. But they want to see each other. You are completely excluded once again. I felt for Carol in that previous episode, and I felt scared for her. I felt worried that she was going to become suicidal. Carol, since the beginning, has been a character that always pinged to me as a depressive individual, just naturally. She has a depressive slant to her, but I didn't view her as someone who was willing to commit suicide. And in this scene, she displays some passive suicidal ideation. She's not actively suicidal, but if the firework were to shoot her in the face and explode, she wouldn't move and she wouldn't stop it. This very long shot of the camera zooming into her. We can hear the fuse of the firework doing its thing in the background. Carol does not flinch. She does not move. She does not take her eyes away except for the very last second before the firework goes off. That is a scary amount of resoluteness in her disregard for preserving her own life at this point. The following morning, Carol is done. She's done with this resistance of the Pluribus. As Diabate said in an earlier episode, she has had a change of heart. The Pluribus has successfully broken her down. And that marks the end of the previous parts of this discussion, and we will be moving into the Shipwatch. All right, welcome to Shipwatch. We are going to take a look at this final sequence here and give some of the thoughts that I held back in the previous parts of this video. The ship that we are looking at here is obviously Stursia, which is the Carol, Sturka, and Zosia ship. The reason why I'm doing this is, as I said in my video when Pluribus first came out, that in episode 2, Pluribus passed what I called the shipping test. Now, people tend to view shipping as something very cringy, something not worth talking about, something not worth analyzing. And I take a different approach. I view it as a very fascinating social phenomenon. I view it as a very fascinating exercise in narrative analyzation, narrative passion, and an expression of deep enjoyment of the character dynamics within a particular story. Now, what do I mean by that? In my video on Pluribus passing the shipping test, I compared shipping and the way that women behave when they ship, the way that they think when they ship, as being akin to the way that a grazing animal chews their cud. So I believe I compared it to a cow. Now, if you take a look at a cow in the open field, you'll often find that their mouth is moving as if they're chewing something, even though they haven't eaten recently. This is because the kinds of vegetation that these grazing animals, these cows, these, other animals that chew their cud, the vegetation that they eat is very difficult to digest. The plant itself, the grass, the weeds, the hay, they all have a protective layer around them that prevents the inner nutrients from being absorbed. So what these cows do is they eat the grass and they chew it and they break it apart, they grind it down with their teeth and they swallow it. The act of grinding it down with that initial first pass allows their stomach to extract some of the nutrients. But because the act of chewing it initially does not break down that outer protective shell over the whole course of the blade of grass, for instance, cows will regurgitate what they have eaten earlier in the day. They will regurgitate it into their mouth and chew it again. And they chew it again and they swallow it again. This time, more of that protective shell of the grass has been broken open, which allows their stomach to digest and absorb more of the nutrients. And the cow will do this continuously throughout the day. As they continuously graze, they will repeatedly regurgitate what they've eaten throughout the day, grind it down and down and down. This is called chewing cud, and then they will eat it. Once they have extracted all of the nutrients that they believe they can extract, then they're done. They don't need to eat. They don't need to chew their cud anymore. I view shipping like this in a way. Women seem to want to reinspect and deeply analyze character dynamics in ways that the show simply doesn't have time to do, or doesn't want to do, or can't do. The act of shipping, from a social media standpoint, keeps the fandom, keeps the interest, keeps the theory crafting, keeps the analysis alive during periods of drought, the long wait times between seasons that we have nowadays. And from a corporate perspective, it's like free marketing, free R&D, free attention. And I am particularly interested in the legitimization of the thought patterns involved with shipping as a valuable metric by which to analyze a story, and a valuable metrics by which, various insights into whatever TV show or story is being consumed at the moment. So without further ado, let us get into the Stursia Shipwatch for episode 7, Gap. So Carol is sitting in her house. She's looking at this painting that she stole from the museum that she's hung up. It's a painting by painter Georgia O'Keeffe. I talked about her earlier when we discussed Carol's sections of this episode. Georgia O'Keeffe is a very famous, very legendary painter from the early 1900s. She's known for all sorts of things, most of which is her breaking down barriers for women in art, her attention to detail in terms of sensitivity in her paintings. As you can see, much of her paintings had to do with these very soft and delicate flowers. She was also a woman who challenged gender roles, right? She wore gender-neutral clothing for her time period when she was in New Mexico, and there is a museum in her name. Now, Carol took one of these paintings. I noted when she was in the museum that her smile when she was observing these Georgia O'Keeffe paintings felt genuine. Georgia O'Keeffe is associated with women of the time having to be repressed in terms of their true personalities, in their true interests, in their ambitions, and so on and so forth. We know from the first episode that Carol is a repressed individual. I don't know if she is fully closeted, but she is at least partially sensitive toward her relationship with Helen. She refuses to let her audience know that Raban was originally supposed to be a woman. She refuses to write the kind of book that she wants to write, which was Bitter Chrysalis, and instead chooses to write Blood Song of Waikaro. Now, I believe I heard one of the people involved with the show, I think it was Vince. One of them, it was either Vince, Ray, or Carolina. They said that this story is a story about Carol discovering herself. That is what they said Pluribus was about. So I know we all have our various interpretations as to what exactly Pluribus is about. Again, I chose authoritarianism as the way that I would view this story through, but the author's intent is that this be a story about Carol's self-discovery. As I said, the HDP of this show, the protein, the meat of it all, the nutrients, is not the Pluribus. It is not the sci-fi aspect. That is the theme, that is the setting. Yes, it's important. But the meat of this show is Carol Sturka, her self-discovery, the character analysis of her, and the relationships that she will undergo. So after being isolated for over a month, she's finally cracked. She wants Zosia to come back. She wants the Pluribus Hive to stop ignoring her. But before she makes that call, she stares at this painting by Georgia O'Keeffe. And the painting is called Bella Donna. It was painted by her in 1939. It's a flower painting, and this painting is particularly loved. I'm reading here from the archive.com website because it says that it shows O'Keeffe's mastery in capturing organic curves and delicate textures and exemplifies her profound connection and sensitivity. So we know that Carol is a character that is very abrasive. We know that she can be very standoffish. We saw that in the previous episode with Kumba. She underestimates people. She views other people to not be as intelligent as her. She takes a while to draw conclusions that other people drew quicker than her. But she assumes that other people wouldn't have been able to figure it out as quickly as she did. So up until this point, Carol has had a lot of barriers built up, a lot of bad habits concerning the way that she relates to other people, the way that she thinks about other people. She is not someone who wants to be vulnerable at all. I think she refused to show grief in front of Zosia or in front of the other members of the Pluribus, instead choosing to respond to them with anger anytime they would have brought up Helen or something she didn't want to talk about. So I found it very interesting that this painting represents O'Keeffe's in touchness with sensitivity, as I believe that is the transition we are seeing with Carol in this episode, her transitioning from being abrasive towards Zosia and by extension the Pluribus to allowing herself to be more sensitive and to show a more vulnerable side toward them. Although it might be good for Carol to be working through whatever she's working through, it's my opinion that the Hive is ultimately hostile. I think that the Hive is pretending to be nice. And if they're not, they are still hostile, even though they don't intend to be so. So they will certainly use this more vulnerable side of Carol, this opening up of Carol, this emotional extending that she is now doing to Zosia to their advantage. So we see here that Zosia gets there very fast, which means that she must have been very close by. Again, the Hive is really, they're avoiding Carol, but they're not like far away. We saw in the other episode that the Hive evacuated the entire area, but I don't think everyone evacuated. I think they knew that Carol would eventually come back to them, and they were keeping Zosia on standby. It's also a little bit creepy. Was Zosia just sort of, in like a powered down standby state, just staring at a wall in a building or a house or a hotel until Carol told her to come back? We don't know. But all we know is that the manipulation is working at this point. As we saw in episode 3, Grenade, Zosia doesn't have to do much to manipulate Carol. She just needs to allow Carol to come to these conclusions on her own, make Carol think that it is her own idea and her own will and agency seeking after the comfort of the Pluribus. And Carol is someone who needs comfort at this point. The people involved with the show have already said that multiple times. So we have this next sequence, which I like to call the stalk walk. There's multiple ways you can view this little walk, this mirroring, synchronized walk that the two of them do. First, it made me think of Call Me By Your Name or romance, This is a technique that is used in a lot of movies or TV shows, this sort of walking in synchronization. Perhaps maybe there's a table in between them and they're walking across the table. They're both, not allowing the other person to get close. So they are mirroring each other's walks. In this case, they are walking toward the same direction. I also viewed it as Zosia, the Pluribus, looking a little predatory, right? We have Carol walking down, and Carol is taking her eyes off of Zosia. Zosia is not taking her eyes off of Carol at all, and she is mirroring Carol's behavior, sort of like a predator animal, a wolf, a coyote, would stalk its prey. Similarly, the Pluribus, the members of the Pluribus don't need to speak to each other because they are already on the same wavelength. They already have access to each other's thoughts. There's no need for vocal language. We saw that a lot in episode 2. In this scene, we similarly see Zosia and Carol acting and understanding one another without speaking. It's almost as if Carol is becoming a part of the hive mind out of desperation for human connection, rather than actually being a member of the hive mind itself. Now, we cannot move past this scene without addressing the elephant in the room, which is the just married car that Carol picked up early in the episode. Now, I mentioned when she first picked it up that was going to, be something to watch out for as we continued in the episode. And then we had the scene of Carol at the diner. So this scene right here, where Carol is at the diner, I likened it to being almost like a wedding reception or an engagement party of some sort. Carol was bringing up a lot of mentions of Helen, Helen's birthday, things that they have eaten with Helen. But it seemed, along with that just married car at the beginning of the episode, that she was almost either doing a send-off for her formal self, her former self, not her formal self. She was doing a send-off for her former self, or that she was having some sort of an allegorical, marriage reception or celebration of some sort. So we get to her meeting Zosia again for the first time in over a month. As she's walking down her driveway, it's almost like she is walking down the aisle with the car to the right that says just married, with Zosia standing at the end of the driveway, at the end of the aisle, almost like a groom waiting for the bride. And that is the lens under which I chose to view this scene. I think it is checkmate for Carol at this moment. She realized that she cannot survive without the contact of the hive, without the presence and companionship of Zosia, unlike Menuso seems to be able to do with his iron will. So as she walks down, she eventually gives in, runs up and hugs Zosia. And I don't know, I just view Zosia's facial expression here to be kind of manipulative. I think there's more here than just simple happiness that Carol has requested her presence again. I really do think that the hive deployed this isolation, this cold shoulder upon Carol as a form of psychological torture akin to the isolation and the loneliness she would have felt going through conversion therapy and whatever she went through in that conversion therapy torture that she had to go through when she was younger. So yeah, I do think that the Pluribus has Carol wrapped around their finger at this point. I don't know where it's going to go from here. I don't know how Carol's going to find a way to accidentally kill Zosia this time. but I think she's going to be a lot more suggestible to the manipulation that the Pluribus has for her through Zosia. But I don't know what they're going to do exactly. Is it going to be a battle of getting Carol to give consent, to give her stem cells so that they can bring her into the hive mind? Is that going to be the remainder of what this season explores with the two of them? And I wonder how Manusos fits into that. Is he going to appear suddenly in New Mexico only to be shocked and appalled at the fact that Carol is, friends with or potentially girlfriends with a member of the Pluribus hive mind? So yes, I do think this is checkmate for Carol. At this point, the Pluribus got her to not only admit that she needs them back, but to become more emotionally vulnerable. They broke down some of her barriers, some of her walls. I think we're going to see a different side of Carol from this point onward. Not all at once, just slowly and little by little. But yeah, I'm really interested to see how Zosia changes. Personally, I want Zosia to be extremely evil and manipulative. I want her to not be as nice as she seems, but it does seem like the Pluribus Hive is genuinely good-spirited by their standard. It seems like they don't have a will or desire to be evil, even if some of the things they do might be hostile in nature. That is not how they see it, but I do kind of want Zosia to be evil. I think it would be very interesting to have her be that kind of villain. But yeah, let's see what Vince Gilligan and the writers and the actors, Ray and everyone else, has in store for us. To the people who are saying that the show is slow and that it's boring, I have no idea what you're talking about. Like I said, there might just be something wrong with you. You need to go to the doctor. I don't know what. You need to get off social media so your attention span can be fixed, can be healed. But for me, this is the most interesting show I have watched in a very, very long time. Let me know what you guys think. The Stursia ship is leaving the harbor. It is beginning to set sail, which means potentially bad things for Carol Sturka.